Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. It is the Albion Maximilian, and this is one that has been at the back of the queue for a very long time, and I can say special thanks to Kane Shen for bringing it to the front of the queue. He's doing a review on the sword as well. It'll be linked in the description down below, and I'll have some thoughts and musings to add to his video there. So check it out if you want to hear me blab on more about it, or hear somebody smarter than me talk about it, frankly. Now, I've struggled with this review because I don't know that I honestly have a whole lot to contribute that smarter people haven't already contributed, but I'm going to try. And so thanks to Kane for making me dust it off and prattle on about it. Before I get into the review, though, a couple quick notes and caveats. This is a sword that a lot of folks have asked me about, asked me to sell it, asked me to talk about it, and it certainly comes up a lot in conversation, even though I don't display it or talk about it very often. So hopefully it's going to be something that interests folks. But do know that this one is a secondhand sword. I bought it with my own money. It was in a state of disrepair. I cleaned off some of the rust that came on it. I still think it's reasonably representative of what an Albion Maximilian is, though do know if you buy one, it's probably going to look a little more spit shined than mine does. The other bit to note is that I don't study HEMA. It's going to be very obvious when you see me attempt to move this around. And on a more detailed point, this is a sword I think you need to study how to use. It doesn't, at least feel intuitive to me. It feels like a sword or weapon that you need to become familiar with and learn how to use, not one that you can pick up that just feels like an extension of your arm or something like that. Now, people have moved it elegantly. It's a me problem. I can't, though, and it'll be very obvious as you see me move it around here. So just know that my thoughts and musings on it as a sword are that of a novice. Anyway, this sword is $1,650 in its configuration. That's based on the blue grip not being a color that's offered. Maybe it was when this sword was originally made. You can get a custom grip color. It costs a little bit more money. And the sword can go over $2,000 if you want it blued with half-wire grip options and you want it a little bit more bedazzled. There's ways to make the handle a little bit more bespoke to your liking with some of the options that are available, and they cost a little bit more money. So keep that in mind as you hear my thoughts as well, that this is around about a $1,650 sword in today's money. All right, it's time for me to talk about the bits and bobs and fits and features. I'm going to start with the pommel. Shape-wise, this is kind of a cross between a scent stopper pommel and a sphere that's been fluted. I have the Albion Schloss Erbach sword that has a fluted design like this that maybe it draws some inspiration from, but the fluting is not sharp to the touch. It's also symmetrical, so it has a very pleasant look to the eye. It has some kind of grooved accents in it as well. All of it, I think, adds some additional tactile purchase. So if I grab onto it with a glove or with a bare hand, I can really feel those flutes, but none of them bite into my hand. They're all really quite comfortable, and I think they give a really handsome look. It tapers down towards the grip area and meets the grip material quite well. So there's no, I don't know, it looks really thought out, I guess I would say, and that the grip material overlaps, but it doesn't butt in. I don't see any bad transitions. I don't see any edges of metal. It all looks like it twists really tight and then is stuffed into the grip material and has overall a really handsome appearance. It feels good in the hand as well. I know I've mentioned that, but if you're moving around and gripping it really tight, which you're going to find yourself doing if you grab the pommel, because this is a heavy sword, and when it's moving, it wants to jump out of your hands a little bit. You do feel like you can hold on to it, and it's not trying to tear itself out of your hand. Those little flutes add a little bit of additional grip, not a lot, but they also don't come at the cost of chewing into your skin. The other bit I want to note about the pommel is the little peen at the end. It's really well done. There's not a bunch of hammer marks. It's very clean. This one's been bumped around quite a bit, but overall the execution on the peen looks really quite good. I imagine this is tough to do to make any peen clean, but when you're talking about a big giant sword like this, I imagine there's a lot to clean up, and this was perhaps a chore, and I'm glad that it came out as clean and nice as it did. It really caps off the pommel quite well and makes it an overall handsome appearance. I do like the peen area here. It's my one thought is that it kind of ends this twisted section here, and I find that the quillins, which I'll talk about later, lack that kind of little finish work. I almost wish they had little caps on them at the end. It would tie things together a little better in my eye, but subjective nonsense there. Just, I would say the pommel overall is really quite well done. As I move on to the grip, overall, it's a hexagonal shape. It has a strong central ridge that runs throughout the grip, and obviously you can see these facets on it, but there's more depth to it than that. So in overall profile, you can see that it narrows down towards the pommel area and becomes a little bit more cylindrical in profile in terms of the hexagonal shape. The other sections of the grip are a little bit more ovoid. There's still a hexagon, but anyway, it's a little bit more cylindrical as it moves down towards the base. So if you're if the hand near the pommel needs to move around it and you're changing directions, then it's not a problem to do. As the grip goes up, it swells up in the middle near where the risers are. That's where it's at its widest. I don't find myself grabbing there very often. It's hard to control if I hold it there, though I guess if you wanted to, you could, and then those risers may provide some extra grip, though. As you move up the grip, it has some swell and taper where it's widest in the middle, and then tapers down at either end where it meets the pommel or the guard. There's a lot of dimension and things going on in this shape, and not only is it well executed with very crisp, clean lines, it just has a lot of dimension and stuff that really make it ergonomic as well. I do find the grip overall quite comfortable and quite handsome in the hands. So I look at this grip shape and I think, would another shape look better or feel better in the hands? Sometimes the spiral wrap that they provide on swords feels better. I really happen to like that on some swords, but this one, the grip, I think, really marries the overall form and function quite well. The strong central ridge and the profiles and all the tapers add some sort of complexity to the hilt that would otherwise be missing if it were a simpler shape with the grip. And I think the function is also there. It indexes well. It feels like it maneuvers quite well, even though I don't necessarily know how it's supposed to maneuver. But overall, I think they nailed the look, but it also feels really ergonomic and thought out in the hand. To wrap up the conversation on the grip, I'll talk about how it transitions. I've already mentioned the pommel area. As it moves up to the crossguard area, it's also excellent. There's no extra residue, gunk, anything that overlaps that's not supposed to. It's transitioned as well as you would really hope it would be, which brings me to the crossguard. Overall, the appearance of the crossguard is excellent. I've mentioned before that I wish they were capped off on either end of the quillion with a little hat or something to finish them off, but apart from that, it's excellent looking. It has little grooves that add accent pieces. The flutings are symmetrical, and so they don't like play tricks on my eyes that some of the medieval made pieces do. Overall, it's just a beautiful, beautiful crossguard, and where the blade meets the crossguard as well, there is a gap here. So this is maybe one of the worst gaps I've seen on an Albion, but still on the totality, it's an excellent gap in the crossguard. And that I can see one, but it is very small, under a millimeter on one side, and nothing really to complain about. I would just say that I notice a slight gap, is where in some Albions I have seen none. Overall, the crossguard though is excellent. I have I would just want a hat at the end, but I'll shut up about that. Overall, it's beautiful, and I would say that the totality of this hilt seems to resonate with people above and beyond the other offerings from the two-handed greatswords that Albion offers. I have a Tyrolean as well. I believe there's also the Archduke, but I don't hear people talk about those very often or ask questions about them. And having a Tyrolean alongside the Maximilian, I constantly get questions about the Maximilian, but nobody seems to care much about the Tyrolean. It's maybe because it looks like it has a doorknob for a pommel, which incidentally, in a post-apocalyptic fantasy world where people are making swords out of street signs, how come nobody uses a doorknob as a pommel? I feel like it's a missed opportunity for some sort of weird fan fiction. But the Maximilian overall just has this look that people really seem to like, and the blades across the Archduke and the Tyrolean look the same. So it's really this hilt that seems to resonate with people beyond anything else, and I can't blame them. The fluting and the little grooves and little accents and the shape of the grip, all in all, just make more than the sum of its parts. It's really quite a striking looking hilt, and I can't blame anyone for really liking it and wanting one. It looks quite cool. Alright, so next we'll talk about the blade, the pointy stabby part, and more or less it's a big long blade. Albion is pretty accurate with their measurements. Mine is 1/8 of an inch longer than is advertised at 41 1/8 inch long. It has two fullers that run roughly half the length of the blade, and this would be some finishing quality that I would gripe about. They're not terminated as evenly as I would like them to be. Albions are kind of known to be machined out and symmetrical and have less variation, but some of these fullers just kind of peter off a little bit, and they don't transition perfectly evenly, and my eye is drawn to them. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't impact function, and most people probably won't notice, but that's one little gripe that I might have. Anyway, distal taper and all that kind of stuff, which isn't going to come through particularly well on camera, as this barely fits in frame as is going to be in the description down below if you're interested in what kind of dimensions, how they taper down and whatnot. But it's more or less a hexagonal cross section. It's got a flat cross section that runs along the top. There's no prominent central ridge or anything like that, but again, this is made for slashing rather than stabbing, which I can say you're kind of lucky to be able to hit the thing that you're swinging at. At least I am. If I were trying to be surgical with a thrust, I don't know that I could be particularly accurate with it. So I think the cross section and the rigidity it provides is suitable for the intended task. Anyway, there's two fullers that run about half the length. There's a kind of a flattened cross section, or it's a hexagonal cross section, but the surface is flat. There's no prominent central ridge. There is some taper involved. Not necessarily a lot of distal taper. Well, there is some distal taper, as you'll see in the description down below, but very little in the way of profile taper. There's also one prominent bevel that goes down. There's a secondary bevel on there. Mine is not particularly sharp, and again, mine is a secondhand sword, and I haven't done much in the way to sharpen it. I've cleaned it up a little bit, but in the process of cleaning it, I've more than likely dulled it as opposed to sharpened it, and I haven't made any effort to sharpen it. It certainly has a profile, though, where I would feel comfortable trying to put a keener or better edge on it. I just haven't bothered doing it because I'm rather clumsy with this sword, and moving it around is I'd be a little bit nervous if it were sharp as a razor blade, with as awkward as I am moving it around. Anyway, mine is not particularly sharp. I don't know how sharp they come, but this one is not particularly sharp, which you'll see in action when I do some cutting later. Now that brings me to the moving it around part, and this is terrible. And I'm sorry. I'm just sorry in advance. I don't move it particularly well, but it's hard to move. And now, things that are going through my mind as you see me moving it around is show how it moves. Try to move something. If I think of it as a pole arm, it's still kind of awkward for me to move around. It's just, there's not really a way to do it comfortably for me, but that's a me problem, and I want to emphasize that it is a me problem. There are competent martial artists who I've seen move this particular sword around, and they do it gracefully, and they do it with intent, and they seem like they're able to maneuver this in a way that is meaningful. I just don't practice with it. I don't know how to do it, and this is one important thing that I think is going to influence my decision on answering the question if I think it's worth it or not, and that is, this is just not something that is intrinsic. You don't pick this sword up and feel like you know how to move it around. You pick it up and feel like, I need to study how to move this around. And if you're not interested in doing two-handed sword drills to move it around gracefully in large sweeping motions that capture the momentum of the sword and move it kind of gracefully into another strike, then this may not be a fun one for you. It certainly wasn't for me. I was thinking, don't hit the sword tip on the ground. And what did I do? Whack the sword tip on the ground. Now, note, you can't really tell that I did it. Good on you, Albion. The tip is still there. No damage whatsoever that's discernible. I know I whacked the tip on the ground, but you wouldn't be able to tell it by looking at the tip. So that's the other thing about it, is that it's, even if you're trying to be cautious with it, I found it difficult to do that. It's difficult to start and get momentum going. It's certainly difficult to stop. Even if I spread my hands far apart, it's just, there's not a way for me to use this sword the way I understand how to use swords comfortably. And that was my experience moving it around. Now, in terms of cutting, also not going to be particularly impressive here because it's not particularly sharp. So more or less it smashed things around rather than cut them. Obviously, if I put a sharper edge on it, it would likely cut through things cleanly. At the same time, it's a durable sword. I whacked it into the ground. I smashed it into things. It still is straight. It splattered things all over the place. I would also note in the process of cutting, because I am smashing things, I don't feel an enormous amount of vibration in my hands. So when you bash things around and bat them about, a lot of times that's going to deliver a lot of vibration in your hands. And if the nodes aren't in the right place, you really start to feel the shock in your hands. And I felt it. I could feel some vibration, of course, but I didn't feel a lot of it. The way the nodes are placed in this particular blade seems to work well, and it wasn't uncomfortable as a user, even to use it as a bat. Now, that's effectively what I can share with you about this particular sword, my experience in using it. Obviously, if I knew how to use it, I could offer more. If I sharpened it, it would cut better, and you would maybe get a better idea for how well it cut. But perhaps that it's cumbersome, and that if you whack the tip in the ground, it still stays in one piece, is what I can add to the conversation. So, anyway, is it worth it or not? At $1,650, is this worth it? Well, in so much as any Albion is worth it, they seem to hold their value quite well, and they seem to be fun to use. They seem to be well-built things of the variety of thing that you are buying. And so if you want a two-handed great sword, and this one resonates with you as it does with so many, yeah, it's worth it, and it's probably gonna retain its value quite well. However, if you're looking for a sword and you just think bigger is better, do note that, unless you're Schwarzenegger, this is probably not going to be the best choice to just pick up the first time around. If you're like, I want the biggest, coolest looking sword, but you don't necessarily have the training or strength to maneuver it, I'm not a small man. This is not fun for me to swing around like any old sword. But there's a number of Albions that do feel like just extensions of your arm. And I would say that those, for the backyard cutter, for just having fun, for hanging on the wall, and wanting in an oh shit moment, those are a lot more fun to move around. This is like a tool for study, something that you need to think about moving around. It's not going to be something that's fun to use indoors. It's not something that's fun to pull out and use for cutting. It's something you have to kind of think about. Now that's a type of fun, so I'm not saying it's bad. If that's something that sounds up your alley, yes, this is a beautiful sword. It looks great on the wall. It can be fun to move if that's your kind of fun, but just know, if you don't have a lot of swords and you're looking for a good one, which I think is a number of people watching these videos, this one may be one that you want to feel out first before buying. As a side note as well, I'll talk about this more on Kane Shen's video, but I personally prefer the Tyrolean. Not so much the grip. I do have to be a little cautious with my main hand on the grip. That one gets a little fat towards the center, and I end up choking up towards the crossguard quite a bit more. But that doorknob, I can maneuver it around, and maneuverability is where I really struggle with this sword rather than grip. It doesn't feel like the Tyrolean wants to rip itself out of my hand because it's slippery. It feels like it just because of the weight. And the doorknob, as I call it, gives me a little bit more maneuverability. It feels like I can use it a little bit more in the grip, and makes me feel a little bit more in control of the weapon. So I actually prefer the Tyrolean to this one. I wish the grip was a little bit more slender, but the doorknob I actually like more than the fluted one. Not in appearance, it does look like a doorknob, but I think that in terms of function, I actually like the doorknob a little bit more. Now that's all I have in this video, but if you want more, then do know that Kane Shen is making a video as well, and I am moonlighting in that video a little bit and comparing and contrasting this to some other swords and putting in some supplementary information. So if you want more, there is more. It'll be linked in the description down below, and I encourage you to check it out. That's all I've got though. Cheers, and thanks for watching.